Alright guys, in the last video we went ahead and started our easy HTTP Ajax library. We created the get method and we're able to get data from an external API or whatever type of resource that you're using. Now we're going to make the post method. So let's go down here and let's create, we'll say this dot easy HTTP dot I'm sorry, not this, just easy HTTP dot prototype dot post equals function. Okay, so this is going to take in a couple things. It's going to take in the URL just like the get, but it's also going to take in the data, okay, because when you're adding data you obviously need to send the data. And then we need the callback. Okay, we're doing this asynchronously just like we did with the get request. So this works very, very similar to how a get request works. We're going to say this.http.open, except for instead of get, we're going to pass in post. Okay, we're also going to pass in URL and true. Down here, we're going to say this.send. Now, when you're actually sending data, you're gonna need to send the data, and this is going to be just a regular JavaScript object when we pass it in. So we need to run it through a function called JSON.stringify and send it as a JSON string. So let's say JSON.stringify and pass in data. Okay. Now we're going to do our onload, but in addition to that, we need to set the content type. Okay, and that's done in the HTTP header, and we can access that by saying this.http.set request header, and the option we want to set is content-type, and we want to set it to a value of application/JSON. Okay, that's the data type that we're working with. Okay, and then we can proceed to do our onload. So what I'm going to do is just copy this. Again, we need to, since we're not using arrow functions, we need to do the self equals this. So let's paste that in. We're going to call onload. We don't need to check the status because we're doing a post request. Alright, so we're actually going to get rid of all of this. Probably could have just typed it out, but all we want to do is send the callback with null and then the response text. Now the response text should be the new post that we added, and the way that we know if it's a new post, it should have the ID of 101, because when you make the initial get request, the last one is the ID of 100. Alright, so let's go ahead and save this and let's test it out. So we'll go to our app.js file and we're going to just comment out all of this to avoid any confusion. Oh, one thing I forgot to show you is that we can actually get single posts as well with the get. So actually let me uncomment that and copy it and say get single post. I probably should have did this in the last video, but it's fine. If we say post/1 and then go down here to our function, let's change it to post. That makes more sense. And then just console log post, and then we'll comment this out and let's run that, and you can see it'll just give us that single post, okay, with the ID of 1. So you can use it in that way as well. Alright, so now for the post, or the post requests. I realize that this can get confusing because we're dealing with post as a resource as well as a post request. So let's say HTTP. Oh, actually, first of all, let's create the data. So we'll say const data, not SATA, data equals an object, and let's see, we'll say we want to do title. We'll say custom post. Body This is a custom post. Now these posts in the API we're using, they can have user ID as well. So if you wanted to add a user ID, you could, but I'm just going to leave that out. Okay, so now that we have our data, semicolon, let's go ahead and say http.post. We'll put a comment here. We'll just say create post. So we'll pass in the URL, which if we look at our API documentation, we can make a post request to our /post, so this same URL. And as I told you before, you can use the same URL as long as it's a different method, different HTTP method. Now the second parameter, if we look at our library, is going to be the actual data. So we're going to pass in right here data, and then we have our callback. All right, so our callback, we're going to say error and then post. And I'm just going to copy this. We just want to check for the error. And if there isn't one, then we're going to just console log our new post. So let's try it. Let's go back to here and save and reload. This .send is not a function. I forgot the HTTP right here. Save. Let's see, there it is. Okay, so it took a second. And you can see we get back our custom post for the title. We get the body, and then the ID. Notice the ID is 101. That was added by the REST API, by their side. Okay, we didn't add any ID. If we look at our app.js, there's no ID here. It got added through their side, through the back end. All right, so our post request works. All right, so now let's do a put request. Okay, so we'll do our put method. So it's going to be similar to the post, so I'm going to copy all of this, paste that in, and we're going to change this to put. And let's see, the parameters here are going to be the same. It needs the data. We're going to change this to a put request. And let's see, we're going to do the header. That's good. This is good. Callback. Yeah, everything else is actually the exact same. So that should be good. Let's save it. Let's go to app.js. And we're going to just comment out this. And then I'm going to leave this data as the data that we want to use, that we want to update a certain post with. Okay, so let's go down here. And we'll say http.put. And then the URL, if we look at the placeholder routes right here, we can make a put request to post / and then whatever that ID. All right, so let's go right here. So we'll update ID 1. So I'm going to grab this URL and pass it in. Okay, second parameter will be the data we want to update it with, and then our callback. All right, so our callback will say error and then post, and then we'll do the same thing we did here. Okay, so now let's save, and there we go. So now notice that the ID is 1. That's the one we're updating, and it's now updated with our data that's right here. If we were to do 5, save, it updates 5. All right, so now the last thing we have to do is the delete. So let's go back to easyhttp.js, and let's see, this is going to be similar to our get. So let's actually copy, let's copy this. So it's going to be .delete, and it's going to take in a URL and a callback, and then we're going to just change this to a delete. Okay, self this, onload. Again, we're going to check for the status, make sure it's 200. Call the callback with null and then the response. Now the response is actually going to be just an empty object because we're deleting the post. So it's not going to return a post that's deleted. And then the error if there is one. So let's save. Let's go back to app.js. And let's actually copy the GET request here. All right, so it'll be http://delete. And let's see, if we look at our possible routes, we can make a delete request to post and then the ID. So we'll just say /1. And actually, instead of returning, if it's successful, instead of returning this, which will be an empty object, let's just say post deleted. Okay, let's make sure we save that actually. And then we'll go back here, and instead of posts, which we don't want, we'll say response. And down here, we'll say console log response. And let's save and run it, and we get post deleted. All right, so that's our library. So you can see this is pretty easy to use instead of the person having to type all this. All right, so similar to how like a library like Axios or Super Agent works. Obviously, this is much less in depth than libraries like that. This is just something very quick, but you can see how it's put together. Okay, and hopefully that's helpful. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.